Today I'd like to announce Lama Nasser-Gammett, if I got it right. And she's an expert in growing mushrooms, and she grows mushrooms and sells them locally as part of the forest people. And she and her husband and daughter are all here and went to a lot of trouble to set up both the demonstration and packets for people to look at and after the presentation. And we're really excited, and we've got a lot of visitors, in fact, here to see this, as well as a lot of members. And so here is Lama.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this. I'm very excited. My name is Lama Nasser-Gammett. My husband Matthew and my daughter Leela, are there in the back there. And we're the forest people. We started our mushroom cultivation business as the forest people in Boonville a few years back, and we recently moved to Fort Bragg, well, months ago now, and are transitioning. So we're not yet selling mushrooms for eating, but we're getting there. We have to reset up our mushroom house and everything. We'll talk a little bit about that. But today we're going to talk about mushroom cultivation, and there's a lot to talk about, and I want to leave room for questions, so it might feel like I'm speeding through. But I do love a conversational environment, so if you are dying to ask a question, please jump in. Hi, Eileen. Matthew and I started growing mushrooms in Boise, Idaho, when we met, and Leela was a little baby. Food sovereignty has always been a goal of ours, and we strive for subsistence farming, and oyster mushrooms are a great addition to that. So we started growing oysters because they're considered a great beginner mushroom, but we stuck with them for a lot of really great reasons. And I'll speak to that in a little bit. They really fit well into our diet plans because they have high protein. You know, when you're growing a lot of vegetables, you're not getting a lot of protein in that. So that's one of the important things about mushrooms that it can offer. When we moved to Mendocino County, we started the forest people. And there's me at the farmer's market. We sold to local restaurants and grocery stores and several farmers markets in town. We were at the Fort Bragg Farmers Market. I recognize some faces here for a while there. And at our height of our business, we were growing 100 pounds of oyster mushrooms a week and offering several different varieties. So what you see here is often called a blue oyster or a gray oyster. It's the one that's common. The oyster mushroom species has a lot of varieties. So there's all sorts of types, just like there's different varieties of kale, right? Lacinato and red Russian and all that. Same species, different varieties. But there's also different species of oyster mushrooms. For example, this pink oyster, same genus as the others, but different species. It's a tropical variety. This is an Italian oyster. Some eye candy here. This is a pink oyster again. The golden oyster, again, different species. But still in that oyster group. So what you're seeing here, we call mushroom logs or oyster logs, and we're replicating a log out in the woods, but we're using a different material. So what you're seeing is straw that's been inoculated with mushrooms mycelium.
So you're growing all these that you're showing?
Yeah, so we've grown in the past. So currently we're not in operation, but we're getting back to that point since we moved. So mushroom cultivation, there are over 3,000 different edible mushroom species, but only 60 are cultivated around the world. But 85% of mushrooms that are cultivated are dominated by 6 species. Any guesses of what those are?
Shiitake.
Yeah, shiitake's one of them. Portobello.
Cremini.
So cremini and portobello are actually the same species. Yeah, so that counts as one.
Button.
And button is the same species. So button, cremini, and portobello are all the same species. So they're different varieties and growing conditions of the same mushroom. Chanterelles actually can't be cultivated. Yeah, so those are not on one that we can.
So
Lion's mane?
What's that?
Enoki.
Enoki is one of them.
Lion's mane?
Lion's mane can be cultivated, but they're not of the big six.
Oh, maitake?
And maitake's not either. You would think so. So button mushrooms, which include that cremini and portobello, shiitake,
Tree ear.
oyster, the wood ear mushrooms, enoki, and a mushroom called paddy straw. Those bottom three are big in Asian markets. So we've grown some other varieties other than oysters. This is a king trumpet, or royal trumpet as it's called. It's actually a relative of oyster, same genus, Pleurotus orangii. And then when we were living in Boonville, we partnered with our neighbors who grew, I'm pointing at my screen, I'm sorry. Who grew shiitakes and lion's mane. And that was Keeper Trout from Natural Products of Boonville. He's a master mushroom cultivator, smaller scale, and specializes in these two. They take a little more precise mushroom technique to grow and grow well. We also grew reishi mushrooms, which are not, like you wouldn't make a reishi sandwich, for example, but you would dry it, powder it, make it into a tea for medicinal purposes. Reishi, R-E-I-S-H-I. Is that right? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. One of our favorites, and as gardeners, you all might be interested in this one. This is called a garden giant, or King Stropharia. And these are mushrooms that are very vigorous and grow in wood chips. And you can inoculate the wood chips, and you can spread them around in your garden under the plants. And they get the water when you water the plants, and they produce mushrooms alongside your vegetables. And they have a slightly potato taste, but still mushroomy. They're really fun. So, and like we're gonna mostly talk about oysters today because that's what I'm familiar with. But just like oysters, they don't need any special equipment, and you just need to obtain the starter for it. All right, let's get down to some basic terminology. So, a mushroom is a felted 3D network of mycelium. It's the reproductive structure of certain fungi. So mushrooms are in the kingdom fungi. Not all fungi produce mushrooms. Mycelium is the vegetative part of the mushroom that lives underground. It's made up of these thread-like, they're called hyphae, that grow and will form a network of mycelium. When the mycelium is ready to reproduce, if under the right conditions, it puts up a mushroom that then releases spores. And so spores would be akin to seeds for plants. Okay.
What do you mean by felted?
So what I mean by felted is, does anybody needle felt? Or I'm sorry, or wool felting, this concept, where the fibers really integrate and weave tight. So they,
It's a mat.
what is it?
Like a mat.
Yeah, so it makes this mat that's really tough and strong and sturdy, and it communicates with itself. So, there's intelligence there. They're sending signals. Mycelium actually, this is for another class maybe, but and I wouldn't be the one to talk about it. But one of the magical things is they communicate with other organisms underground, right? Like, so there's been studies that show that trees will send signals and nutrients and to other trees through mycelial networks, right? So all plants have relationships with fungi, either within their cells or externally to other plants.
So it doesn't need to be the same mushroom, it could be any of the other plants that give it the nourishment?
Explain what you mean.
Well, you're saying the roots come from the other roots from trees or only the mushrooms?
Yeah, so the mycelium is the main organism of the mushroom. right? And so I liken it to like, think about an apple tree. So that would be the mycelium. When the apple tree is ready, it flowers and produces an apple. That's the mushroom, right? It has the seeds in it, the sexually reproductive part. So that gets put out. So whenever you see a mushroom, there's a whole underground network of that
Web.
organism. Yeah. All right. So next term is spawn. Spawn is mycelium that has been grown onto grain, some nutrient-rich material that the mycelium can eat. So I have some here. I'm gonna pass around.
What kind of grain is it?
So there's a number of grain that you can use. This particular bowl is wheat berries and millet mixed. We use rye grain when we make our own spawn.
This is the spoon.
And this is spawn. And so give it a smell. So it has, it has a very interesting mushroomy, alive smell. And so spawn is what mushroom producers use to start. So instead of ordering a seed packet, we order spawn, and it's the genetic material of the mushroom that we want to grow. So if we talked about spores a second ago, if we started from a spore, we wouldn't necessarily get the same, we'd get the same mushroom, genus and species, right? But we wouldn't necessarily get the same variety. Just like an apple. If you plant an apple seed, you're not going to get a Red Delicious or a Granny Smith. You'll get something similar to it, but the expression will be slightly different. So it might not be a good keeper, it might not be a good, have as much sweetness to it. With the mushroom world, it's the same. So producers, commercial producers, small-scale producers, start with tried and true mushroom genetics. And you can get this, there's a number of spawn suppliers online. You can outsource it, you can make it yourself with enough technique. You can find a mushroom in the wild and clone it. Take a tissue sample and grow it out and make your own spawn and try to grow it.
Will you be doing this? Is that part of your plan?
Making my own spawn?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe or maybe not from wild mushrooms. I'd love to try it if there's a variety of oyster that I like and play with. But yeah, I hope to do that. Yeah, it's as a producer, just like farmers order their own seed, they don't always save seed. It's just easier. It's one less thing to do. We have in the past outsourced our spawn and just get a shipment in the mail, right? And then use that because we're so busy producing the mushrooms. But I'd like to shift into more of a like holistic business model, so we do everything. All right, so that's spawn. And substrate, this is our last vocabulary term. So substrate is the thing that the mushroom, the mycelium, will then eat before it produces mushrooms. So the grain is just a nutrient-rich medium, and when you break it apart, you have all these little kernels that you're going to then incorporate in some kind of prepared substrate. We use straw, specifically rice straw, because that's what we have access to that's organic. In our area. It's actually from the Central Valley. Unfortunately, there's nobody producing straw around here. And then so the substrate, the mushroom continues to use that as a food source, and eventually it'll fruit out of it. Over here on the right, this is a picture of wood chips, because lots of mushrooms grow on wood chips. Oyster mushrooms are unique in that they can grow on wood like they do in the wild, but they can also grow on any ligand cellulose material. So any type of straw, wheat straw, rye straw, barley straw, different kinds of material. I have a slide coming up that lists it. It's pretty impressive.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Have you noticed any taste differences depending on the substrate?
I have not. Yeah, I read a study, Paul Stamus did a study comparing wood-grown oysters to straw-grown oysters, and the study showed a slight increase in sugar content on the straw, which is counterintuitive, I would think, right? The wood's denser, so I think there's probably a lot of factors that go into that. like how the straw was grown, right? Like the nutrients in the starting material.
Thanks.
So this picture, it's one I love. It's a close-up. So what you're looking at is straw here. Like I said, this is rice straw that we use. And this is a grain of spawn, like a rye grain or something. And the white fuzzy stuff is the mycelium. And this is probably about 2 days after I made this mushroom bag. And it's reaching out and it's grabbing on to its new food source, right? And so if you think about all the, just to go back to the spawn real quick, the reason that it's in these little kernels is that you're gonna mix it in with the straw, and now you have 1,000 little points from where the mycelium is gonna grow out radially and start consuming the straw. All right. All right, so I mentioned that oyster mushrooms are special and we stuck with them. We've talked a little bit about this ability to grow on numerous substrates. And usually they can come from agricultural waste streams, like stuff that's not getting used for other things. They have a high production, a high conversion ratio, meaning the amount of substrate that you're using puts out the same amount of food at the end. So it's a 1-to-1 with oysters. You can actually get better than that. So if, let's say you're using 10 pounds of straw, you can get 10 pounds of mushrooms from that. Right?
How do you get better than that?
How do you get better? Yeah, it just puts out more mushrooms. I don't know. But,
Air.
minimal space requirements. So I mentioned before that at the height of our business, we were growing 100 pounds of mushrooms a week, and that's in a shipping container. We had, 8 by 20 foot space in use.
So they mature in a week?
No.
They just grow?
Yeah. So yeah, there's some colonization time. We'll talk about this too in just a minute. But it's about, just to make it easy, a 6-week turnaround. But if I make them every week, then I'm harvesting every week.
Right.
Yeah. So here is the list of substrates that oyster mushrooms can use. Take a minute to look at it.
Does that include rice hulls? Because that's easily available.
Yeah, there's so much stuff. I took a mycology class in college, and we grew oyster mushrooms on toilet paper rolls. I mean, it was gross, right? But I mean, not used, but still, I don't want to eat them just because of the bleached paper. Yeah, anything. They're like, if I leave a bag of mushrooms like headed for the compost, it's in a paper bag, and they just sit out at room temperature, they'll start consuming that paper bag, right? And eventually, if they have the right conditions, they'll fruit again. So one thing that I'm really excited about eventually figuring out, I don't know if anybody's noticed the Scotch broom here. I'd like to try that.
Yeah.
And also the pampas grass. So that's invasive. I don't know I've never worked with it though, and my understanding is it doesn't, it comes back. You have to really dig it up and it's hard to remove. But if we could get some community organized effort around cutting it down before it seeds and turning it into mushrooms, that'd be really cool.
Wow. I'm just thinking in my head, coffee grinds. Do you, with some of those substrates, you have to worry about the competition of unwanted molds?
Yeah, so there's a way you prepare. We clean the substrate before we use it. That's one of the other great things about oyster mushrooms is they don't need specialized equipment. Oyster mushrooms are very aggressive. The mycelium grows really quickly and outcompetes other organisms. With the coffee grinds, they're actually pre-sterilized, right? Because they get heated when they're used. And so the pasteurization process is how we clean the straw that we use, right? So it heats it, and you can do that in a stock pot, you know what I mean, at your house. So when we do it, we use a 55-gallon drum that we fill with water and heat with a large burner underneath because we're doing larger quantities at a time. What I'm going to demo today is something people can do at their house. So good segue. Step 1, basic growing oyster mushroom steps. We clean the substrate. So, and like I just said, all we do is immerse it in hot water that's been brought up to 160 degrees. This is a picture, excuse me, you can't see the barrel, but we've made these mesh bags that allow the water to come in, but the straw doesn't come out. And we heat up the water and then immerse it down in there.
How long does it have to be in?
1 hour.
I wonder why you don't boil the water.
So there's a technical explanation. Pasteurization kills most competing microbes, but not all. So what's left are the thermophilic bacteria that are left. And they actually act as, they're not competing with the oyster mushroom, and they act as a protection from other organisms. So they, when you pasteurize, they are still there and they act as guards, is how I like to think about it. This is actually something I only recently learned. Like I always wondered, like, because it's bad to over pasteurize. If you get it too hot or let it sit in the heat too long, then the process doesn't work as well. And I always thought it was because the straw got oversaturated, like too wet, it was holding too much water because the cells broke down, but it's actually because you end up killing everything. Yeah, and so they don't have that nice protection there.
Would that be the same for milk?
For milk?
The same thing?
Well, it kind of is, right? So when you pasteurize milk, I don't know if there is that protection. I don't know if the thermophilic bacteria live in milk, but the lactobacilli in milk act as a protection from it spoiling from other organisms. So that's why raw milk will not get bad contamination. Anyways, that's a tangent. So, sorry. It's all the microbes, right? Like sauerkraut, and this is all managing microbes. Okay, so we clean the straw. And then we're gonna mix the straw with the mycelium, right? We inoculate with mycelium, which is simply taking that grain and mixing it with the straw or whatever you're growing on. I'm just gonna pause there real quick. So we've been talking about oyster mushrooms, other mushrooms that you can grow, shiitake and lion's mane, right? They, and the reishi, they won't grow on straw. So they really, they need a hardwood. So you would use wood chips or inoculate a log, which I'm sure many of you have done, where you drill holes in a log and plug them with the myceliated dowels. So they need a different setup. Pasteurization doesn't work on the wood chips, so that needs to be sterilized in a special machine. So, which is just a canner, right? Pressure cooker is what we use for that. But like going back to this, the oysters are great because you don't need any of the specialized equipment.
How do you inoculate? I would think of inoculate as giving it a shot.
Yeah, it's, you're inoculating is just putting something in something else, right?
Okay.
So how I inoculate, and I'm going to demo this in just a second, but you take the straw and we do a layering, like a thick lasagna, right? So we put some straw down, we sprinkle some of the spawn grain. We put some more straw down, we sprinkle some straw, sprinkle some more, so it's throughout. When we make something like this, the spawn is all throughout, the straw is just sprinkled in, alternating. Yeah, and so you're just introducing the mycelium, the culture of the mushroom, to its food source that it's going to consume.
So this has that process done, those first steps. Does that
Yes.
have that in it? So it has a mycelium.
Yeah, so these are mushroom kits that I've made, and everyone, hopefully, depending if I have enough, I can't do a quick count, but hopefully everybody can take one home with them today. So it'll be a good educational experience, and hopefully I'll get some mushrooms out of it. All right, so after we mix the spawn with the straw, we're gonna just leave it in a warm space. We're gonna walk away, and depending on the size and how much spawn you used and the temperature, it's roughly going to take about 3 weeks before it's ready to produce a mushroom. Then mushroom's gonna want, to trigger the fruiting of the mushroom, it's gonna want a different environment. So I like to think about it as during the summer months, when it's warm, the mycelium's growing. So if you go out into the woods, you know, when you turn over a log or something like that, there's the white stuff underneath there. That's mycelium that's growing. We don't see mushrooms in the summer, really. There are a few. And the coast is definitely a unique space. When the rains come, when it gets colder and moister out, that's when we see all the mushrooms popping. So when the mycelium's done growing and eating the straw, then we want to move the bag to a humid environment to trigger the mushroom to start fruiting. So we want more oxygen and we want light and moisture.
Do they fruit in that plastic jar?
Yeah, it will. All right.
So step 3 is in darkness?
It doesn't need light, yeah. Yeah, so when we, I hear a lot of people say, you know, I know that mushrooms don't need light to grow. That's actually only specific to those white button mushrooms. They're white because they haven't had any light, they've been grown in darkness. When they're given light, they look more like a cardini.
Define warm.
What's that?
Define warm.
Warm, room temperature, like 70 degrees. Yeah. Sorry, I wanted to just simplify, so I didn't like put in too many numbers or anything like that. All right, and so here's Matthew, and what he's doing is he's fluffing the straw after it's been drained. So it's been heated up and pasteurized, and then he pulls the bags out, lets them drain, dumps them out. Sorry, I am dry today. And lets the straw cool down a bit before we do the inoculation process. All right, so I'm gonna move over here now and show this process of what I've just talked about. So the first thing I did was I got a pillowcase. And I filled it with straw. And I think, you know, sometimes the hardest part are the simplest things of like, well, where do I get straw? And do I get organic straw or do I not get organic straw? So remember that list, right, of all the different things oyster mushrooms will grow in? Try something. The feed store has straw. If it is rice straw, it should be organic because they treat rice with antifungal compounds. So that's something to consider. Wheat straw is not treated with antifungal, so if you can only find wheat straw, it doesn't need to be organic.
But you have to boil it, or you have to heat it.
You have to pasteurize it.
You have to pasteurize it.
Yep. You might be able to get away with not pasteurizing it, but pasteurization isn't very hard. So I've taken this pillowcase and I've stuffed it with straw, and I'm gonna try not to make a mess. So before I dunk it in, I'm gonna wanna get my water temperature heated up. So this is just a large stock pot, and you're gonna wanna consider displacement. And remember, the more straw, the more mushrooms you get. So, but you know, you wanna fill it up, and it needs to be submerged so there isn't any sticking out. So I'm gonna put this on my stove top. I'm gonna use, this is a meat thermometer, but it has, you know, the appropriate range in here. So it goes up to 170, 145 to 170, 180. So this is gonna work great. And every few minutes I'm gonna come over and I'm gonna wiggle it around in there and get it, you know, keep heating it until it's the right temperature. I brought the thermometer that we use, which is a soil thermometer, like checking compost. You guys might be familiar with this. Yeah.
Are you measuring the water temperature or the straw?
Yeah, so the straw's not in the water yet. I'm only holding it over because it's drippy. So I measure the water temperature.
Got it.
Yeah. So we're measuring the water temperature till it gets up to 160. If it goes a little over to 170, that's fine. It's going to cool a few degrees once we put our straw in. So the range is 140 to 160, right? But when it's sitting for an hour, it's going to drop. So, you know, I wouldn't heat it up to just 140. I would go to 160. That's ideal. And then once it's at 160, turn the stove off. Okay? So you don't want it on the heat while the straw is in there, because that leads to over pasteurization, right? And then you're killing all the protective bacteria. Okay, so then I'm gonna immerse my pillowcase with straw into the hot water, and the water is hot enough to burn, so be careful. And then you're gonna want some sort of weight, and I didn't bring one. Oh, I brought a rock. So even a clean rock or something, or a plate, ceramic plate can get pushed on there. That rock's not big enough, obviously, but some kind of, heat-resistant weight. And then you're just gonna leave it. You set a timer on your phone or on the stovetop, 60 minutes, and walk away.
Let it just sit.
Let it just sit, submerged.
Do you cover the pot just to keep the heat in?
Yes, I do that. Thank you for saying. I forgot the lid. But yeah, I have a cover for my barrel that it just helps keep the lid so it doesn't cool too fast. Also, if you're doing this outdoors, as we do, we like to keep any curious critters out. At our old place, we had very curious chipmunks.
Oh.
So that, for at least one of them, didn't end well. So you're walking away, and then come back an hour later, your timer goes off. It doesn't have to be exactly, oh my gosh, I gotta hurry. Like, okay, if it sits a couple of minutes over, no big deal. Then the supplies you're using, this is special to the mushroom industry. It's called a filter patch bag. You do not need one of these. Okay, you can use a garbage bag. You can use a grocery bag that's plastic. The reason we use plastic is to keep the moisture in, mostly, right, and everything together. You can experiment with bio bags if you want, the thicker variety. They have a thicker durometer. We've tried this before, and eventually it just falls apart because of our high humidity in our mushroom house. The mushroom actually eats it. You can use large yogurt containers, whatever. Some people use 5-gallon buckets that have holes drilled into them. One thing we didn't talk about yet that we will is mushrooms need to breathe. So this filter patch allows oxygen in, but no contaminants or competing organisms. So the mushrooms breathe oxygen, fungi breathes oxygen just like we do, and out CO2. And if the CO2 level is too high, they don't like it, they can get sick.
So how do you use a regular plastic bag then?
So you cut holes in it.
Ah.
Yep. So if you use a regular plastic bag, you're gonna just not huge holes, just poke a few holes, and it doesn't even have to be that many. At this stage, you don't need too much oxygen. Okay, so they're okay with a higher CO2 level internally. All right. Wash your hands. You don't have to. We wore rubber gloves for a long time. We rubbed alcohol on our hands for a long time. I don't do any of that anymore. It's never been a problem. Unless you were just in the garden, right? Then you're going to want to wash really well, is all I'm saying. So I'm opening up this bag, and now I'm taking, sorry, I missed one step. I'm thinking, here, I'll do this. So what I want to do after the hour is up is I'm going to drain this. And I can take this outside and hang it, or I have a strainer I could use. You're going to grab that for me, thank you. And what I'd like to do is not make a mess, is...
Do you need another hand?
Well, I'm
to
thinking
do
maybe
something?
like a plate. Is there a plate in the kitchen that I could set a strainer on that'll catch some water drippage? I think Cornelia's getting one. Do you have a big one?
Take the bottom of the, here.
Sorry, I didn't think the strawberry all the way.
Does the strainer fit in the pot?
Well, not without me. Then I have to move the pillowcase. And it's still dripping.
Somebody could stick it in there as you lift up higher.
Yeah. I think the plate's coming. Here we go.
Excuse me, Lama, I'm gonna grab my jacket.
Please. Before it gets wet. Okay, if you could set that down. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I'm gonna set this in here. I can set this here.
Okay.
So I would, remember it's still hot, so you need to be careful. Wear some hot mitts or gloves or something. And then you're gonna empty the straw so that it can cool down. And straw has a remarkable way of holding moisture. Heat. It'll trap heat and build up in these little pockets. And so you kind of want to get to the place where it's all cool enough to handle before you introduce the spawn into it. So I'm not going to take all this out. I'm just going to do that. All right. And so you're just going to want to expose it to air, get it cooled off, kind of fluff it, separate it. We saw that picture of Matthew. So the idea is that you're kind of tossing it like this, right? And you just want to keep it from the heat holding in any specific area. All right. And then you can walk away if you need to go do something, or you can, basically once it's cooled down, you can pack it then and there. One thing you want to look for is you want to make sure that your straw is not drippy. If you can squeeze it and there's water dripping, it's too wet. So you want to fluff it and let it dry a little more. Okay? Mushrooms need moisture, but if they have excess water, that's an anaerobic environment and they can't breathe. So go back. All right, so now we have our whatever we're using. And I like to start with a little bit of spawn. And I take a handful of straw. So probably more than that for the base. A little bit more spawn. I don't know if anybody noticed when I passed the spawn around, but sometimes it forms these little clumps, right? So that's the mycelium really growing together. You want to break those up. It's not that big of a deal, but if I break it up, now I have 100 little points instead of one clump. It's kind of an interval. So that's the idea. At the bottom, you kind of want to just compact it a little bit so you form your base, and then it'll sit up on its own nicely, and then you just keep going. So this is still too wet if I was really doing this. I haven't heated it or anything, but it would be too wet. So you're going to want to let it drain and dry a little bit from the steam that's coming off of it.
How tightly do you pack it?
So you don't want to, you can pack it pretty tight. There's a point at the very end where I compress and let air out and then seal it, right? Because it's breathing through here. Again, you want to watch out for there being too much water, so it's not, isn't standing water in the bottom. And yeah, you don't want a whole lot of air holes. If there's a big air pocket, it's not that big of a deal. Oyster mushrooms are resilient. So a handful there, another more straw, and so on. So the other thing I didn't say is that straw makes a mess. I think I might stop here. So you might want to consider doing this outside. And the dry straw is particularly uncomfortable to deal with because of the particulates. I wear a mask when I work with it, and safety goggles often because I get the little bits in my eyes and it's annoying. Okay, so we're just gonna pretend that that's all in there. All right, so after I've combined the spawn and the straw, that's pretty much all there is to it. So we have this particular bag, right? I would fill it up if I had enough straw. And then you're gonna wanna, if you're using a grocery bag, you just tie it up however you like, and you need to poke a few holes. Not too much. And then this is something that the industry uses. I'd like to find a different way around this, but it's a zip tie. And what I'm doing is I'm sealing this. You just tie it, seal it up.
So
right?
you leave some air in the bag.
You can. You don't need to. If I'm going to all the trouble of doing this, I want to fill it up so I get more mushrooms out of it. Right?
Okay.
Her bag has holes in it.
So I've pre-made some of these kits here, and I was just trying to make a lot and smaller than I usually would. When I usually make them, I fill them up. So this is what the end result's gonna look like. See how it's all packed up to the top? But the filter patch is still there, showing right here, so that the mushroom can breathe, right? Like I haven't closed it before that, and I haven't tied off near it. So, but yeah, I really want to emphasize you don't need a filter patch. We just happen to have, we bought a bulk quantity, and so they're easy for us to use. So now we've finished creating our mushroom log, and the next step is we leave it in a warm space until the mycelium fully colonizes. So, and like I said, it depends on temperature. The colder it is, the slower it'll go. The warmer it is, the faster it'll go. And I don't think anybody has this problem here, but if you go inland, you know, if it's 100 degrees out, that'll kill the mycelium. It starts to struggle around 85 plus. So you also want to leave it somewhere that's out of direct sunlight.
Put it in a closet.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be dark. I would actually recommend putting it somewhere you see every day, right? So you can watch it grow, because it's so cool how it changes, and you'll watch everything just turn white over time.
We used a shower stall in our, that we didn't use, and there was a window in the room, but not direct, and it really worked well in Alameda.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's what I've done. So when I first started growing mushrooms, I ordered a kit off the internet. This was a long time ago, but it was a lion's mane kit and bathroom counter, right? And so we're going to talk about that next, is now how to take care of it.
So
All right.
fluctuating temperatures.
No problem. Yeah. So it's going to grow when it's warm, and it's going to slow down when it's not, right? When it's cooler. So it'll just take longer. So if you want consistency, you know, as producers, you know, we have accounts and all that sort of thing, and we want to get a certain amount per week, then we try to keep the a consistent temperature, so it's predictable also, right? So we just talked about temperature. Room temperature is fine. Anything that's you're comfortable in, the mushrooms will be comfortable in. As a side, different mushroom strains have different ranges. So if you're in a cold area, there are mushrooms that do better in cold. If you're in a hot area, there are mushrooms that do better in hot. Those pink ones, they won't grow around here. So we need to, that's the summertime Boonville, mushroom. The humidity. So in your incubation, where the bag now is and it's sitting, it has all the humidity it needs inside that plastic. If you've cut some holes, it's fine, because most of that humidity is still inside. Fresh air exchange. So that just means oxygen. On this bag I have the filter patch, you've cut the holes. You don't want to put it in a Tupperware and seal it up, right? So then it's not gonna breathe enough. It might be able to tolerate it at this stage, but once it starts fruiting, it's gonna need a lot more oxygen. At the incubation stage where it is now, it doesn't need light, but once you want it to fruit, it doesn't mind light. You can have indirect sunlight or room lights or whatever, no problem. But it will need light once you want your mushrooms to grow. And the last two, pests and spore load, are more for larger producers, or if you're doing this on a regular basis, and we'll get to that. So this is a comparison of a freshly made mushroom log, straw log, and a fully colonized one. So you see all the little grains of spawn there? Yeah. All right, and so now let's fast forward 3 weeks, and we see, all white or mostly white, and you've cut holes in your plastic bag. The mycelium senses that higher oxygen level outside of the bag, so it's gonna grow towards it and kind of pucker and eventually start pinning. When you take home your kits today, they don't have holes cut, they just have that filter patch. So when they're fully colonized, you need to cut a hole in it for the mushrooms to have fruit. Say, hey, here's oxygen and more humidity in the form of spraying it. All right. Here are pictures of mushrooms that are just starting to fruit. Here are mushrooms fruiting. So these mushrooms are ready for harvest.
Are those holes you put in the ground?
Yeah. So when we grow, we make 3-foot bags.
Oh.
So when we grow in our mushroom house and produce, and so exactly what I just did, but we have it's like rolled plastic that we cut to size, and we tie a knot in the bottom and pack it up, and have a hanging rack system in our mushroom house that has a humidifier that keeps it at like 90% humidity.
But I mean, how does it get out of the bag like that?
Oh, there's holes there. Yeah, so I pack this bag, and then I forgot to put my knife in my pocket. Take a knife, and even, your like thermometer hole for when you have your grocery bag or whatever, you're just gonna want to make a few like that so it can breathe, right?
Uh-huh.
So that's what you're doing. No more. Razor blade, make a tiny little X. More than that, you're gonna get dry spots where they are.
And that's how they get out of the bag?
And that's also how they get out of the bag. So the holes are for breathing, and the holes are also, the mushroom knows, that's where the more oxygen is, that's where fresh air is, that's where light is, everything, it's reaching to that.
So later on, did you make more holes?
I made the holes right when I made the bag.
Okay, so
Yep.
you made that, so, okay.
Yeah, because the mycelium needs to breathe right away. Sorry, it's a little confusing because these kits here and the bag I used as a demo has a filter patch, so it's not necessary to cut the holes at this stage. But when you're ready to fruit your mushroom, you need to cut the holes to increase the oxygen so the mushroom knows it's time to fruit, and so it can access the outside and more moisture.
Well, based on what you did so far, it looked as if there are just a few, you keep saying just a few holes.
Right.
But when it's starting to fruit, it looks like
Yeah.
you need a lot more holes.
So we would do
increase that.
maybe 4 or 5 on the 4 corners, right?
Oh.
North, south, east, west. And so at least 16 holes on ours. One interesting thing we've noticed is the more holes we cut, we always get the same weight of mushrooms, but we'll get lots more small ones if there are more holes cut. If we were to cut one hole, and so this is something to consider what you want to do with your kit, if you cut one hole, you'll get one larger cluster. If you cut a hole on each side, you'll get 4 slightly smaller clusters, but probably similar weight in comparison to the one big one. So just however you want to do it.
So aren't there a few harvests that they're capable of, or is it mostly just one?
Yeah, so we call them flushes. Yeah, so you'll hopefully get at least one flush, and then you can just wait and see what happens, and the process will continue. So you could get a second flush, third flush, and so on, until it runs out of energy or fuel.
And during that first flush, and while you're waiting for more, what is the maintenance? Spraying?
Moisture.
Misting?
Yeah. So in my experience, the number one failure people have at growing a mushroom at home is it's not high enough humidity, because they don't have a specialized humidified room, and I don't recommend having one because it'll ruin everything in your house. Right? Really, 90% humidity, right? Like we run a dehumidifier in our house, so our mushroom house is fully waterproof and has a drain and everything. Nothing can. All the materials that we use to build and design Matthew's genius is all waterproof.
Well, then how can you actually do it in a house?
So the good question, mister. Yeah, so there's
So the humidity's high around it at least.
yes, yep. And another thing, I'm sorry I didn't bring a demo, but one thing you can do is create a humidity tent and just get another piece of plastic and like with a coat hanger or something, drape it so it kind of does this. and then it'll kind of hold humidity in this immediate area, right? But one of the reasons to have it on your kitchen counter or your bathroom counter or something that you're gonna see a couple times a day is have your misting bottle right there and spray it. Wherever the holes are cut, you're gonna wanna spray that area. So
You don't
humidity.
spray, you don't stick the sprayer in
Yeah,
when you
nope.
give it
You're just gonna spray, so if the
just
holes
at the
here,
entrance.
you're because you want this area to be moist.
Okay.
We used a shower curtain on a rack
That's great.
to create that
Yeah.
environment.
And if you have like a shelf on your shower so the steam can come up, that's gonna keep it humid. So that's another reason a bathroom is a good idea.
I have a question. It seems like this is a lot of plastic and you cannot reuse these, is that correct?
You can if you clean them, but cleaning, it takes a lot of energy too.
Are there other materials other than plastic that you could use?
This is an issue we've been exploring for years, and we've tried different things. Like I mentioned, the bio bags that are made out of corn, that has its own set of issues, right? Because they're genetically modified corn that they're made of with diesel fuel with the tractors and all, and whatever polymers they're using to stick them together. But, right, better than plastic. But the mushroom eats it. So that's tricky. I'm sure there is a thicker type. They're very expensive. So, it's the struggle of like the farmer trying to grow food, but like we couldn't afford to have custom made bio bags in the thickness that we needed to do this.
Yeah, so Alan, I've actually used any kind of plastic bag I'm about to throw away. So it's old Ziploc bags that I'm gonna toss. I've used it 5 times, it's ready to go. It's got a rip in it, that's what I'm recycling.
Yogurt containers, if you find the big ones, or there's other, like my collagen tub thing, right, little plastic. You're buying these things anyways, instead of throwing them in the recycling bin, store a few, and then exactly what we did here, take some knives, cut a steak knife and poke some holes in that yogurt container, and then you can do the same thing. Yep.
So how do you clean the bags?
I don't.
One do it. How would one?
How would one?
Yes, you wouldn't want to use a bleach spray.
No. When we clean our mushroom house, I just use like the biodegradable dish soap to like scrub the floors if they're really dirty. Vinegar can work. You could just wipe it clean with soap and water if you're washing a plastic bag and reusing it. I think that would be just fine with an oyster mushroom. Matthew, please.
You mentioned the artist and the terracotta.
Oh,
art.
yes, thank you. We had a friend that had this vision to make these. Do you want to speak to it, actually?
Well, yeah, basically just imagine a column that's made out of terracotta and it has holes in it and it's about the same size as this bag. We had a friend who got really excited about this alternative, and so she built it for us and she fired it and everything, and Lama grew mushrooms out of it, no problem.
Yeah.
It worked.
Yeah, it worked.
Absolutely.
So caveat, we grew mushrooms in our high humidity mushroom house, right? If you're doing this at home, it's going to dry out, right? Because it's not enclosed. But maybe the shower curtain, an old shower curtain or something like that around it to hold the humidity. But the terracotta, right? Maybe you could set it in a bowl of water, it wicks the moisture up, and it would maintain that. But yeah, it needed some work. We also have some friends in Ukiah that are potters and mushroom growers working on the same thing. So it's coming, but it's also, for a home, I think it's great for a home grower. For a large producer, it becomes really unfeasible to manage. We would need, 100 of these things and then have to sterilize them in between uses and really scrub out all the mushroom gunk and whatever, right?
You don't want to throw that away, so you have to clean that.
Yeah, and then that's using energy to heat the water, whatever.
Excuse me.
So yes,
It seems
please.
like you could use glazed pots. Glazed.
Oh, they would be easier to
It
clean.
would be easier
for
to
sure.
get the humidity in and,
Yeah, that's a great idea.
How do you poke holes?
You would just have to have one specially made.
Make them,
Yeah.
put the holes in.
Or if it had a drain, it might work. Yeah, just the drain and then the mushrooms would fruit at the top.
oh, so you could use.
Yeah, as long as it isn't too big, because if it's too big, then the straw in the middle isn't getting enough airflow,
You
right?
need a cylinder.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
you could possibly use a garden pot with some kind of plate lid on top of it,
Mhm.
and then the oxygen
Yeah.
would come in through the drain hole on the bottom.
Yeah.
So it was a free-for-all, like.
Yeah, let's do it.
I've seen people use strawberry pots before.
The strawberry pots, but yeah, they're big holes, they might dry out. And we've worked on the other side of it, like Matthew ordered a whole bunch of wax worms, because they have a plastic digesting microbe in their gut, and we fed them plastic and bred them for this use to eat all our mushroom plastic bags that we were throwing away. Anyways, that's a story. Yeah, it was a good experience and doable. But now there's a lot of discoveries about microbe digesting plastic, and maybe we can order some and play with it and just get rid of the plastic so it doesn't turn into microplastics, right? It's something that is important to us. All right, let's see. How am I doing on time? My clock's not showing here.
2:15.
Oh, we're over.
It's 2:12.
2:12. Okay. All right. So I'll speed through the rest of this. This is a contaminated bag. This is what happens when the mushrooms don't get enough oxygen airflow. It's hard to see here, but it's green up there. So that's a competitor. It's probably trichoderma in there. And what you're seeing brown here, these are metabolites. That's what the mycelium produces when it needs to defend itself. It's its immune system. And the metabolites are something that's actually like where we find our antibiotics and stuff like that. Medicine is made from. This is, I love this picture because it's a pink mushroom fruiting, and despite the contamination, it's still fruiting. They're so vigorous. These bags got contaminated during the big PSPS, the PG&E had a power shut off during fires a few years ago, and we didn't have any power for like 5 days on our mushroom house, so we couldn't get that airflow. We couldn't run the generator 24/7.
So, but those, even in the contaminated bag, the mushrooms are still healthy to eat?
Yes, yeah, they're fine. All right, so this is a picture. I wear a respirator when I go in the mushroom house. That is a giant cluster. Sometimes these just appear out of nowhere. That was like 3.5 pounds or something. And the reason I have these up here is oyster mushrooms are known for their high spore load. You can see these little icicle shapes. Those are the spores. You can't see them. They're microscopic, but when you have enough of them, they kind of glom onto each other. So if you have respiratory issues or you're sensitive, you might not want to fruit the mushrooms inside. Okay? No big deal, one-time thing. Shouldn't be a problem at all. There's spores everywhere. But as a producer, I'm going in the mushroom house every day with a lot of mushrooms. I want to protect myself from the particulates that get absorbed. Okay, so here's a recap. We're going to decide what mushroom we want to grow, decide what variety. We're going to obtain the spawn. Order it online if you're a beginner, and then we're going to transfer the spawn onto a cleaned substrate, so the pasteurized straw in this case, and then we're going to put it somewhere that's warm, and a few weeks later we're going to make sure there's holes in that bag, and we're going to start misting it to produce the mushrooms. And now what do we do with them? Well, we cook them. And I say we cook them because we have to cook them, right? So mushrooms, we don't have digestive enzymes for mushrooms. Certain mushrooms, including the oyster mushroom, has a heat-sensitive toxin. So once you cook it, it's fine. So, but it can cause stomach upset if you eat it raw.
So they need to be cooked.
Yeah, even the button mushrooms. I grew up eating button mushrooms with like ranch dressing back in the day. Yeah, don't do, like, try to avoid them. The button mushrooms have a carcinogen in them that is destroyed by heat, so.
Okay, so those little white mushrooms in the market are the same thing?
Yeah, all mushrooms should be
cooked.
Should be cooked.
Should be cooked.
Mm-hmm.
I eat them raw.
Yeah, try to switch. All right, so I just have a few pictures of my favorite ways they can replace meat. I really like making a shepherd's pie with mushrooms, sauteed mushrooms, instead of beef. This is just a dusted cornstarch and pan fried.
What kind of mushrooms do you use?
These are oyster mushrooms. Yeah, oyster mushrooms are so versatile. I love them so much. They don't have a strong overbearing flavor. Like, they go with whatever you're eating, but they're really meaty.